Yeah, thank you, Manas. Appreciate it. Good morning and good evening to all of you, and welcome to everyone who's joining from across the globe, as well to our distinguished panel members, Prasad and Saket. I am Sean Bouani, partner at Zinnov, and I will be your host for this panel discussion. So one of the things that we see, roughly not even a week goes by without us reading about some cyber hack and how they were successful in penetrating some type of enterprise, government, or NGO. And the amount of cybercrime is accelerating globally. Just in the last 15 months, we have witnessed bigger and more damaging cyber attacks, from Kaseya to SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange to JBS, Colonial Pipeline to CNA. And according to Forbes, the cumulative damage and costs of cybercrime are far more significant than those inflicted by natural disasters in a single year. And just yesterday, T-Mobile has confirmed non-authorized access to its systems. So security is no longer seen as what is next. It is now part of the core strategies for every organization. So how can leaders re-envision their security strategies, given these new aspects? How can these leaders address new threats while also ensuring seamless access to real data in a real time? And what are the top challenges that leaders are losing sleep over? In this panel, I'm very excited to be joined by two accomplished security leaders, Saket and Prasad, who will help us shed a light on these pertinent topics and help us answer some of these questions. Saket, Prasad, welcome. And we all know that organizations should be aware of their risks and taking action to protect their data, servers, and services from attacks. To do that, today's CXOs and cybersecurity teams will need to approach the next horizon of business with kind of a dual mindset. First, they must address the new risks arising from the shift to remote work, while also securing the required methodologies and technologies. They also will need to anticipate the new normal, which is the next normal, and address how their workforce, customers, supply chain, channel partners, and their sector peers work together so they can effectively engage and embed security by design. So that being said, Prasad, I'll go to you first. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges facing your industry today, and how are you going by tackling them?
Hello, Sean. Great to be here. I'm really excited about what's being projected in Confluence. Heard about transformation, innovation, technology, infrastructure. The unfortunate truth is the attackers have been equally at their job over the last couple of years. And so that is the biggest threat. It is data breaches from attackers. And they're getting more bold, they're getting more funding, and they're getting more sophisticated as time goes on. And you can start off with your simple denial of service to disrupt your brand image. That's just the baseline. Stealing and selling of data. So if you have a public-facing website, people can exploit your third-party scripts and actually steal your data. And once you do that, you can go after your customers, partners, employees to exploit, right? So that's a threat. For product companies, intellectual property being stolen is a threat. So that's very important because you are top of your industry because of your intellectual property. And finally, last but not least, ransom access to your systems. People want to do it for financial gain. So that's another risk that we are all constantly watching out. It's being reported.
Thank you, Prasad. And yeah, I mean, they are getting more bold. A lot more ransomware happening. I just read somewhere that the average ransomware ask is about $233,000. And one of the key insights, that 59% of customers will not do business, with companies that have been breached, or at least in a very recent time. So Saket, I want to go back to you and follow up on what Prasad just said. We know that many organizations today are not entirely up to date on the latest technologies and solutions that can help their respective companies, customers, vendors, partners secure their environments. In your opinions, how should organizations evaluate their exposure, risk exposure to cybersecurity?
Sure. First of all, Sean, thank you so much for having me here. It's truly an honor to be sharing the virtual stage with you and Prasad. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Coming to the question which you mentioned about, and I think Prasad painted a very good comprehensive picture around, a lot of issues which are cropping up with cyber. I want to take one step back so that we can take 2 steps forward about how do we manage risk. Because the problem with cyber that has become is that and I like this line which was said by the CEO of PayPal. He says, we went from being Flintstones to Jetsons in only 9 months of the pandemic, right? And you spoke about remotely working in the new normal in which, we are all living in today, right? And if you really think about it, technology which used to be a back office automation, ERP, and just any other way of slightly increasing the efficiency of how a company operates, has now today, especially in the last few years, especially in the last 12 months, become the centerpiece of how we do business, right? It's the way you interact with your customers, your employees, your third parties, basically the entire ecosystem which is there. So when that happens, any impact to technology, which used to be, okay, my ERP is down, therefore I can't bill for 2 days, which is bad, but I can live with that, has gone to the point where, if my systems are down, my balance sheet is getting impacted. Not only my balance sheet, if that comes out, my stock prices are getting impacted. Not only that, the regulator looks at that and says, you know what, you've messed around with the data that you've collected from your customers. So the regulatory fines then come into the picture. The public scrutiny happens. And we've all seen Congress grilling Google and Facebook, not once, but so many times, right? If you think about it, there's this entire ecosystem of impact that happens where finance is just, the financial impact is just one aspect, the reputational impact, the long-term impact in terms of, what the share will do, what the trust in your company would be for consumers who are buying more product from you, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that was never the case when a hack happened 10 years back or 20 years back, right? Is there any other thing? And that was the thing. Now, when that's the case, Sean, the problem has become that when impact on technology is a business impact, it's no longer a problem of the technologists. It's no longer a problem of the security folks. It's a boardroom problem. World Economic Forum in 2021, in the report said that the #1 man-made worry, assuming coronavirus is not man-made, the #1 worry, man-made worry in the world today is cybersecurity. Now think about it. The world spends $200 billion on cybersecurity every year, growing at more than 16%, CAGR, right? And even at 16% growth, which is one of the highest growing industries on the planet, why does it continue to be the #1 worry? And the problem is we are taking principles of how we looked at security 20 years back and now trying to hard code that into how security should be looked at for the next 20 years, which is not the answer. So now coming to the question which you asked, we've always been looking security reactively. If you think about it, right, whether it's antiviruses, whether it's vulnerability scanners, in fact, one of the most sold cybersecurity product categories on the planet is an SIEM solution, which is basically a SOC that you run. And a SIM solution is basically looking at your logs and converting that into incidents. Imagine how reactive it is, where if you are being hacked right now, it will tell you, oh, you are being hacked, so now investigate. And there's a full industry around that, right? It's almost like driving by seeing the rear view mirror. Every time I'm getting attacked, I need to do something, I need to do something, I need to do something. While on the other side, when you talk about predictability, and there's a lot of industries which have gone predictive, it's almost like saying every time somebody defaults, I will go ahead and then I will take money and not give loans. But if you think about loans, for example, in financial services, when you apply for a loan, based on the historical data of how many people have defaulted on what credit scores, on what bank balance, on what net worth, you can predictably say that what is the probability that this person will repay the loan or not. We don't have that for cybersecurity. So what I'm saying in short is the world of cyber needs to shift from reactive point in time, assessment, going to the point where it can be real time and predicted, proactive. And that I think needs to be the big shift, which has already started in a lot of places, but that I think is the big shift that we can expect in the near future of how do you quantify the likelihood of being breached in the next 12 months, 12 weeks, 12 days, 12 hours. That is, I feel, the holy grail of cybersecurity, where all the inputs from your cybersecurity products go in together, and then you answer the so what. This is what my breach likelihood is. So yeah, that's just my opening comment, Sean.
No, that's great, Saket. I think some excellent examples. I like the rear view mirror on the car. But I think one of the things you were talking about that's interesting to me was around how financial services, insurance, and so on, they have these predictability models that they have already built into their processes. And cybersecurity is, in a sense, still more reactive. Are there any best practices in that sense? Are there any companies doing that, solving for that problem right now?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. And, we've been seeing this quite a lot. In fact, if you actually categorize CISOs, and, I probably speak to anywhere between 7 to 10 CISOs every week, given the nature of my job, you can actually categorize them starting from the most basic CISOs where all that matters to them is compliances, right? So there are a ton of CISOs, all that they care about, okay, I need to be ISO compliant and, I have to be regulatory compliant, et cetera, which is great. You need that. But guess what? 98% of the financial services industry, which has been hacked in the last 5 years, 98% were all PCI compliant. They were all ISO compliant, right? So compliance is important, but then, the journey starts from there. It doesn't end there, right? So that's the most basic version of CISOs in their maturity. There's slightly more advanced ones which actually go ahead and then implement beyond the compliance side of things, the reactive side of security. And that's where, having the right kind of SOC, the right detection capabilities, that you're detecting certain things, enabling certain things, and put security in the practice which is out there. And then the third level, which I would say the most advanced level, I would say the mindset there becomes, how can you be secured by design? Where you don't think of security after the hack has happened. Oh, I'm doing this. You don't report to the board how many computers are not patched and how many people clicked on a phishing link. That's not a smart thing to report because the board doesn't care about that. You're able to predict that based on these 20 signals, I can predict that there's an X% likelihood of a cyber incident to happen, this kind of incident. And some CISOs even take it one step further where they quantify in terms of dollar value risk. Because remember, the board, where cybersecurity is such a big concern now, no longer understand or they never cared about technical jargons in terms of, likelihood of being breached. But if you talk to them saying, given what you have in terms of your existing security posture, we are sitting at a $260 million risk, a random number I'm taking. And this risk can only do three things. Either you mitigate the risk. So if you want to bring $260 million down to $150 million, give me a $5 million budget. And I will mitigate the risk by adding cybersecurity products and controls which are out there. Second, if you don't want to mitigate or you only want to mitigate to a point, transfer the risk by buying cyber insurance. So either you mitigate or you transfer, but even after you transfer, you will not come down to zero. In the last one is accept the risk then. But in all the three cases, you're actually making the board make cyber risk an informed business decision. So I've seen some incredible companies, and of course it has to do not only with a large budget, but it has to do with the mindset of the CISO and the CEO. So I've seen companies, whether it's Morgan Stanley, whether it's American Express, which has a dedicated team on quantifying cyber risk, which is there, whether it's Capital One, whether it's Target, whether it's Netflix, and I'm trying to give you examples of various industries. There are some incredible work which are being done in terms of quantifying the risk predictably, not only for your own self, but also for your third parties and the supply chain, which is out there. So Sean, absolutely. The short answer is that's happening quite a lot. And that's the maturity of the CISOs that we get to see today.
Thank you, Saket. I mean, that's very interesting. And I'm glad that a lot of organizations are taking this to the boardroom and to the C-suite. Super important. I think, this question, that I want to ask is for both of you. This is something that we hear about all the time. Zero trust, zero trust, zero trust. And given today's way of working, where users are connecting from outside the corporate walls. What do you see are some of best practices that enterprises need to employ to ensure secure access, the ability to verify identity, to establish trust, no matter where, how, and when user log in, whether they're an employee, an auditor, a vendor, a third party, an end partner. I'll go to you first, Prasad, and then subsequently to Saket.
By the way, great explanation of the risk in the boardroom by Saket. And I think it's very much needed at this time, along with fortifying your assets, right? You have to fortify your assets, and that's where zero trust comes in, where you identify your sensitive systems and data, and then start by establishing least privilege. So that is the key. No more trust of the network. Verify every connection. You can always start small, with your high value assets and expand to every application, connection, and device that is connected, right? That here is the good news, right? When we went on a zero trust journey, it took us several years because we had to kind of evolve it, patch it together ourselves. Today in the market, we have good maturing solutions for zero trust. For regular companies, they can start small in the journey because there are multiple pieces to this. If you look at the advisory from White House recently, they said, hey, all the government systems should be zero trust compliant and multi-factor authentication. Great start, however long that will take. But I think elimination of network trust, multi-factor authentication, micro-segmentation, device validation, and finally, full visibility and inspection for your threats. That's the journey that we have gone through. And I'm happy to say that today, folks can start their journey and get there quickly, especially with this whole pandemic and everything accelerating. People may want to look at it closely. Over to you, Saket.
Thanks, Prasad. And, I'm generally the geek and the nerd on a panel, but Prasad, you already talk about all the technical stuff. So I'm going to talk about something non-technical about zero trust, right? Let's talk about zero trust being implemented in real world today. And let's give you a small example, right? When you think about zero trust, right? Think of your family, which today already lives in zero trust. And I'll explain what I mean by that, right? Now, if you think about it, now your family might have kids, your spouse, your parents, grandparents, whatever it is, right? What that means is that, if you want to know whether they have fever or not, right? You would basically go and simply, just because they're in a house, whether they have COVID or not, just because they're in a house, you don't assume that they don't have COVID, right? Even if somebody's sneezing, even somebody's not, and there are so many asymptomatic stuff, and we've all been testing even when we're not symptomatic about it, right? So a slight analogy there is that we're almost like the zero trust for COVID when you talk about your entire own family. And at every single individual level of all the family members, you want to keep the test on. You want to be, asking them to keep washing their hands when they're going out and coming back. You want to sanitize everything, etc., etc. That just because they are in your house or somebody's not leaving the house doesn't mean that you would trust them and COVID can't happen, right? That's really what zero trust is all about. And just boiling down very simply, the leaf nodes, if you think of it as a tree, the leaf nodes are really your assets and your identity of employees. These are like the two leaf nodes where you need to do security at that level. So what you need to do is you don't trust the asset no matter where it is, whether it's in your network or it's outside, it doesn't matter. And then you do everything in the capacity to protect the asset. Similarly, you don't protect and you don't just assume security of the identity. You actually protect the identity in terms of the user ID and whether it's leaked credentials, whether the access is how it is happening. You implement a CASB, a DLP, and there are a ton of controls which are out there. So just because it's at a place, it doesn't give them any privilege. That's what zero trust means. And the way we have seen that being implemented in some incredible organizations. And by the way, I must say this, right? I mean, we are very fortunate to get to work with Akamai. Without a doubt, they're one of the most phenomenal implementation of zero trust which are there, arguably on the planet. It becomes a pain for companies like us to work with them as vendors, but that's a different story. But they're super secured. I would say one of the most secured companies, in terms of the great zero trust implementation. But on the other side, why I mention this is that the way we look at it, we like giving trust scores at every IP level. So every laptop, every server, every desktop, because sometimes it becomes ambiguous. What is the meaning of trust? So whether you have temperature or not, you can objectively quantify that for every individual in your family. And if there's no temperature, there is a slight chance that you don't have COVID. So there is a way to quantify whether you have COVID or not. Similarly, when you talk about zero trust also, you actually quantify, you start with zero trust, but you can't remain at zero trust, right? Because you have to trust computers, you have to trust applications, you have to trust individuals to be able to work with them. So how do you trust? What is the degree of trust? Is the next evolution phase where there are mechanisms by which you can have real-time trust scores for every server, every laptop, every business unit, everything which is every employee which is out there, and then you club them together, and that is what goes to the board. So that's just my quick 2 cents around zero trust, how we look at it, and implementation. Sean.
No, this is great explanation on both sides. Prasad, I love the idea how you went down, on the technical side and kind of, explain. And you and I talked quite a bit, in the past around how Akamai, came to be, in terms of the zero trust, business. Really interesting, story. And your analogy, Saket, makes a lot of sense, to me. That we have a lot of questions, coming in, from the audience. So I want to ask a question, that somebody wrote. With hybrid remote scenario becoming the new normal, what can CTOs and CIOs do differently to minimize cyber threats and attacks? And does the structure and business processes of certain industry sectors make them more susceptible to cyber attacks? I'll let you guys go at it.
I'll give a generic answer. Actually, I think you need to assess, evaluate risk as a primary function of your business. It's very important. It's different for our company versus airlines versus financial services versus e-commerce. So that's very important for you to assess your risk as a primary function of your business, and get to as real-time a risk assessment as you can, because your risk can just change, your risk profile, with a small configuration push, with a software upgrade, or even like discovery of a vulnerability. We've all seen Heartbleed, SSL, these kind of things. They just come and change your risk profile like the same day. That's one thing. And then watch out for your supply chain. Assess your vendor security posture and their processes. Don't fall for the logos. It's important how you assess how they protect your business. So that's my couple of thoughts. Over to you, Saket.
Yeah, when Prasad says something generic, let me go slightly technical, and I'll give you and this technical means not technical, but mathematically technical. And I'll explain you what I mean by that. When you look at risk, it's basically a function of likelihood and impact, right? And this is a generic definition. There's no secret there. The real thing is the likelihood. The impact is easy to assess, right? I mean, what is the potential upper bound and lower bound? And then you do a Monte Carlo simulation. That's easy. The important thing is, how do you predict the likelihood of an attack? Because that's the big function of the risk. What Prasad said, and I'm just going to codify that, the likelihood of you being attacked depends on two variables. One is your internal gaps. So when Prasad was saying, patch your systems, implement the right security tools, etc., those are all your internal gaps or vulnerabilities. And I don't mean by just CVEs. Somebody clicking on a phishing link is actually an internal vulnerability, right? A server not patched is an internal vulnerability. So likelihood is a function of internal gaps, and that processed with external threat landscape. And that external threat landscape is where you, depending on your geography, industry, and size. So if I'm an airport in the United States versus a manufacturing company in Egypt, I will have very different types of threat actors which will be interested to hack into me. And that plays a very important role for you to be hacked, because there are different actors with different motivations, with different funding, different skills, different acceptable chances of getting caught, etc., etc. So internal gaps and external threat landscape, when you marry the two, and there are mathematically sound ways to marry the two, you come out with what is the likelihood that you will be breached in a given finite amount of time which is there. So that's how you look at it. And that's how it keeps changing depending on geography, industry, and size. In fact, even the timing of the year, if you're Amazon.com, you're a Black Friday sale, there's a very different kind of, or if you're a WallStreetJournal.com and there's an election going on, there's a very different kind of threat actor that is interested in you versus the normal days. So there are various parameters which determine the external threat landscape, and you compound it with the internal open gaps, and that's how the likelihood of breach comes in. Sean.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm getting the push, that we are out of time. The one good thing, that I know for sure, this roundtable, this panel is not being hacked. So that I can tell you. But gentlemen, thank you, Saket and Prasad. Really excellent discussion. And thank you for the meaningful insights. And I wish we could continue this interesting discussion. So what we knew yesterday may not be what we need to know today. Therefore, I think familiarizing ourselves and implementing the top security tools and techniques of today is crucial to maintaining all our protected networks. Gentlemen, thank you. I really appreciate it. And off to you, Manas.